Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever felt completely torn between, pursuing your own ruthless ambition and then feeling this really deep duty to help others? Today we're exploring a fascinating imaginary dialogue from our source material that actually pits Ayn Rand's hyper-individualism right up against the traditional values of modern conservatism. It's a literal intellectual collision. Imagine Ayn Rand's philosophy as this incredibly brilliant, intense fire. It's the exact spark you need to ignite an engine, right? But it also requires super careful handling so you don't accidentally burn down the whole house. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the agenda for today. We'll start with the spell of Ayn Rand and the thesis of the builder. Then we hit the Christian problem and the antithesis of mercy. Third, we'll see what happens when philosophy meets policy in the real world. And finally, we'll wrap up with conservatism's unresolved soul. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Spell of Ayn Rand, the Moral Drama of Capitalism.
Back in 1957, when Ayn Rand published Atlas Shrugged, she did something really rare. She didn't just sit there and defend capitalism with math or economics. Nope, she turned it into a full-blown moral drama. Suddenly, the ambitious person, the creator, wasn't someone you had to be ashamed of. The businessman wasn't the default villain anymore. In her worldview, humanity is basically split right down the middle. On one hand, you've got the producer. This is the inventor, the builder, the risk-taker, the one who actually creates. And on the flip side, the looter. That's the official or manipulator who just takes from the creator, usually disguising that extraction using the language of fairness or public need. For a ton of ambitious young people who are growing up in a pretty unstable world, Rand offered this amazingly clean road out. She literally gave them permission to work hard and not feel a single ounce of guilt about their ambition.
And this brilliantly illustrates the absolute core of her argument. Rand argued that ambition is only called selfish by those who fear greatness. To her, the creator's ambition isn't some sin. It's the very motion of life itself. She fiercely believed the creator owes the world absolutely nothing except their creation. The whole idea is that success should never, ever be demonized or forced to apologize for existing.
But that brings us to a pretty major structural complication. If the builder is so heroic, well, what is the builder actually for? As J.D. Vance points out in our source text, just think about your own life for a second. Real life isn't anywhere near as clean as Rand's philosophy makes it out to be. A family isn't clean. Poverty, addiction, disability, none of these things are clean. Rand gives us this incredible language for achievement, but what actually happens when life throws completely chaotic, unearned struggles your way?
Which brings us to Section 2, the Christian problem, ambition versus mercy.
Now, this is where the moral friction really starts to spark for religious conservatives. They might absolutely love her defense of freedom, but they collide head-on with her outright rejection of human duty. It's a huge contrast. On one side, Ayn Rand is asserting that the creator has a total, absolute right to live for his own sake. She viewed sacrifice as a literal chain around a person's mind. But on the other side, you have the traditionalist view, represented here by Whittaker Chambers, who warns that greatness without charity just becomes cold. In his view, Christianity doesn't despise achievement at all. Rather, it redeems it through love. Chambers is basically warning us that any society built purely on admiring strength is eventually going to lose its soul entirely.
J.D. Vance actually acts as a really fascinating bridge between these two worlds. He makes this incredibly key observation. Rand can speak to the part of you that wants to rise. Christianity speaks to the part of you that knows you had to be carried. Wow, it's such a profound realization, right? Weakness and vulnerability, they aren't just market failures. They're the exact places where human beings learn grace. Rand's philosophy, because it's built entirely on strength, really struggles to fully explain or accommodate that kind of everyday human frailty.
So, what does this all mean for us? How do we take this high-level philosophical debate and actually apply it? What happens when the intense moral fire of Atlas Shrugged leaves the pages of a novel and enters the very gray, bureaucratic rooms of government? Let's look at how this collision actually translates into real-world budgets, taxes, and welfare debates. Section 3. Philosophy meets policy, translating ideas to action.
Look, novels are undeniably powerful. But policy means dealing with hard numbers, tough trade-offs, and incredibly complex human lives. Out in the real world of government, we're facing a massive balancing act. On the left hand, we have Rand's warning, the idea that government often uses compassion as a mask for control, which just breeds these parasitic bureaucracies. But on the right hand, we have Chambers' counterwarning, that freedom without mercy essentially becomes a desert. The ultimate challenge for policymakers is figuring out how to protect the builder and the free market from being suffocated by government overreach, while also making sure the state doesn't completely abandon the genuinely vulnerable citizens who literally cannot build for themselves.
It's interesting because economists and politicians like Alan Greenspan, who, fun fact, was actually part of Ayn Rand's inner circle in his younger years, and Paul Ryan bring a super pragmatic view to this whole debate. They point out this really fascinating irony. Free markets aren't just magic engines that run on nothing, right? They require deep underlying cultural foundations. We're talking about trust, honest contracts, deferred gratification, respect for the law, and strong civic norms. But here is the catch. The market itself cannot generate those virtues. It just can't. They have to come from families, from churches, and from communities. And those are the exact institutions that require a sense of duty and sacrifice, the very things Rand so often rejected.
Which leads us to Section 4, Conservatism's Unresolved Soul, What to Keep and What to Leave.
So, after examining this massive push and pull of ideologies, we arrive at the ultimate synthesis. Modern conservatism essentially treats Rand's work like that fire we mentioned earlier, an absolutely essential spark, but one that requires extremely careful containment. So the crucial point is, what do they actually keep? Well, our source outlines that the movement retains her deep, abiding respect for work and enterprise. It keeps her fierce refusal of learned helplessness, which is meant to empower people to rise on their own. It holds on to that vital link between freedom and rational judgment, and of course, it absolutely keeps her deep-seated hatred of tyranny. These are the core elements that really fuel the movement's courage.
But, almost in the exact same breath, we have to look at what needs to be left behind if the movement wants to maintain any sense of human compassion. They have to reject Rand's contempt for dependence. Because, let's face it, every single human being starts out dependent, and a lot of us might end up dependent too. The movement also must reject the idea that obligation to others is always a form of oppression. And finally, it has to leave behind the cynical belief that public need is always just some manipulative trick by the looters.
J.D. Vance manages to synthesize this super delicate balancing act perfectly. He notes that we need ambition without cruelty, mercy without dependency, and markets without worship. That is an incredibly delicate tightrope to walk in modern policy, and it's one that directly affects how our tax dollars and social safety nets actually work today. It's all about fiercely protecting the builder while absolutely refusing to forget the broken. Rand is the spark for sure, but she just cannot be the whole fire.
For a final thought on this, we can look back to Whittaker Chambers. He gives this incredibly poignant warning about the spiritual cost of just letting self-interest run totally unchecked. He wrote, "The danger is that it may teach the builder to look upon the needy with suspicion before he looks upon them with love." Wow. It is such a powerful reminder that turning self-interest into a form of idolatry comes with a seriously heavy spiritual price.
Ayn Rand famously asked, "What happens if Atlas shrugs?" But our explainer today leaves us with an even deeper, much more provocative question. What happens if Atlas forgets why the world was worth carrying at all? It's a profound thought to end on, beautifully summarizing that intense core tension between strength and soul. I hope this deep dive has given you a lot to chew on, and I really encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating ideas.